Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to Shloka Day. Today's Shloka is Shloka number 46 of chapter 18. Yatah pravrittirbhutanam
Yatah pravrittirbhutanam
yena sarvamidam tatam
yena sarvamidam tatam
swakarmana tamabhyarchya
svakarmana tamabhyarcha
siddhim vindati manavaha.
siddhim vindati manavaha.
Word for word meaning, translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Yataha,
Yatah,
from whom?
from whom?
Pravrittihi,
Pravrittihi,
the emanation.
the emanation.
Bhutanam,
Bhutanam,
all living entities.
of all living entities.
Yena,
Yena,
by whom?
by whom?
Sarvam,
Sarvam,
all.
all.
Idam,
Idam,
this.
this.
Tatam,
Tatam,
is pervaded.
is pervaded.
Swakarmana,
Swakarmana,
by his own duties.
by his own duties.
Tam,
Tan,
him.
him,
Abhyarchya,
abhyarcha,
by worshipping.
by worshipping.
Siddhim,
Siddhim,
perfection.
perfection.
Vindati,
Vindati,
achieves.
achieves.
Manavaha,
Manavaha,
a man.
a man.
Translation, by worship of the Lord,
By worship of the Lord,
who is the source of all beings,
who is the source of all beings,
and who is all pervading,
and who is all pervading,
a man can attain perfection
a man can attain perfection
through performing his own work.
through performing his own work.
So Prabhupada writes in the purport, as stated in the 15th chapter, all living beings are fragmental parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord. Thus, the Supreme Lord is the beginning of all living entities. This is confirmed in the Vedanta Sutra, Janmadya Asya Yataha. The Supreme Lord is therefore the beginning of life of every living entity. And as stated in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the Supreme Lord, by his two energies, his external energy and internal energy, is all pervading. Therefore, one should worship the Supreme Lord with his energies. Generally, the Vaishnava devotees worship the Supreme Lord with his internal energy. His external energy is a perverted reflection of the internal energy. The external energy is a background, but the Supreme Lord, by the expansion of his plenary portion as Paramatma, is situated everywhere. He is the super soul of all demigods, all human beings, all animals, everywhere. One should therefore know that as part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, one has his duty to render service unto the Supreme. Everyone should be engaged in devotional service to the Lord in full Krishna consciousness. That is recommended in this verse. Everyone should think that he is engaged in a particular type of occupation by Hrishikesha, the master of the senses. And by the result of the work in which one is engaged, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, should be worshipped. If one thinks always in this way in full Krishna consciousness, then by the grace of the Lord, he becomes fully aware of everything. So here's a definition of what it means to be Krishna conscious. That is, you continue to perform your swadharma very nicely, but you do it for the pleasure of Krishna. That is the perfection of life. The Lord says in Bhagavad Gita 12.7, Tesham aham samuddharta. The Supreme Lord himself takes charge of delivering such a devotee. That is the highest perfection of life. In whatever occupation one may be engaged, if he serves the Supreme Lord, he will achieve the highest perfection. No soul is superfluous in God's creation. His divine plan is for the gradual perfection of all living beings. We all fit into his scheme like tiny cogs in the giant wheel. and he does not expect more from us than the competence he has given to us. Whatever competence the Lord has given you, you have to use that fully in his service. Therefore, if we can simply perform our swadharma in accordance with our nature and position in life, we will participate in his divine plan for our purification. When done in devotional consciousness, our work itself becomes a form of worship. A powerful story illustrating that no duty is ugly or impure, and it is only by the consciousness with which we do it that determines its worth, was told to Yudhishthir by sage Markandeya in the Vana Parva of the Mahabharata. The story goes that a young sannyasi went into the forest, where he meditated and performed austerities for a long time. A few years went by, and one day a crow's droppings fell upon him from the tree above. He looked angrily at the bird, and it fell dead on the ground. The sannyasi realized he had developed mystical powers as a result of his austerities. He became filled with pride. Shortly thereafter, he went to a house to beg for alms. The housewife came to the door and requested him to wait a while, since she was nursing her sick husband. This angered the monk, and he glanced angrily at her, thinking, "You wretched woman, how dare you make me wait? You do not know my powers." Reading his mind, the woman replied, "Do not look at me with such anger. I am not a crow to be burnt by your glance." The monk was shocked and asked how she knew about the incident. The housewife said she did not practice any austerities, but did her duties with devotion and dedication. By virtue of it, she had been illumined and was able to read his mind. She then asked him to meet a righteous butcher who lived in the town of Mithila and said that he would answer his questions on dharma. The sannyasi overcame his initial hesitation of speaking to a lowly butcher and went to Mithila. The righteous butcher then explained to him that we all have our respective swadharma based upon our past karmas and competence. But if we discharge our natural duty, renouncing the desire for personal gain and rising above the fleeting happiness and misery coming our way, we will purify ourselves and graduate to the next class of dharma. In this manner, by doing the prescribed duties and not running away from them, the soul gradually evolves from its present gross consciousness to divine consciousness. The lecture the butcher delivered is known as the Vyadha Gita of the Mahabharata. This message is particularly applicable to Arjuna because he wanted to run away from his dharma, thinking it is painful and miserable. In this verse, Sri Krishna instructs him that by doing his prescribed duty in proper consciousness, he will be worshipping the Supreme and will easily attain perfection. So how can Arjuna do his work as a worship? In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna urges Arjuna to worship the Lord through his work. What does this mean? For work to be worshipped, it needs to be done with certain values. The values of dutifulness, detachment, and devotion. When we cultivate dutifulness, we see our work as our due part in maintaining social order, Loka Sangraha. For example, Kshatriyas like Arjuna contribute by protecting people from wrongdoers. If Kshatriyas themselves become wrongdoers, as did Duryodhana, their work is not worship. That's why the common translation of this Gita verse as work is worship is a mistranslation. When we cultivate detachment, does that mean we don't care for the results of our work? No. It means we understand that results depend on factors beyond our role, and we gracefully accept whatever results come by divine arrangement. Without such detachment, our heart becomes locked to the results. Indeed, those results may be said to become our object of worship. With detachment, our heart becomes open to bigger realities. For example, the lessons the Lord wants to teach us, and ultimately the divine love He wants to share with us. When we cultivate devotion, we see our work as a means to please the Lord. So, whatever duties and responsibilities we have as a son, as a daughter, as a husband, as a wife, as a parent, we have to do that duty for the pleasure of the Lord, because that will really please the Lord. And that is actually coming onto the path of perfection. And what pleases Him the most? Not results, but endeavors. The Lord is pleased with your service, not with the results, because the results He gives. That means service is more important, not the result. In the earnestness of our endeavors, He sees our eagerness to offer our heart to Him. And our heart is what He actually wants. By such work, our heart becomes increasingly attracted to Him. And we realize that He is far more valuable than any worldly result of our work. He is life's ultimate treasure. In the Gita's battlefield context, Krishna's guidance helps Arjuna infuse his fighting with dutifulness, detachment, and devotion, thus transforming his work into worship. Work is not automatically worship. When work is done with the values of dutifulness, detachment, and devotion, it becomes a form of worship. Yeah. So work itself is not worship. There are many people who believe that if I do my duties and responsibilities, that is more than sufficient. There's nothing else that is expected of me. That is actually wrong. You should do your duties and responsibilities, but who are you doing it for? Not for the pleasure of your family members or society or nation. That will automatically happen. You're doing it for the pleasure of Krishna. When we do it with devotion, then your work, through your work, you're worshipping the Lord. Yes, that's how we understand it. So very nice explanation by His Grace Chaitanya Sharan Prabhu, and very nice pastime. The pastime from the Mahabharata clearly indicates you cannot judge a book by its cover. So externally, we may be engaged in certain duties and responsibilities. Internally, only the Lord knows how pure your heart is. Yeah. So you could be a butcher, but you could be a nice devotee of the Lord. Although you may think, okay, that is contrary to what we have been learning all along, but that's the starting point. That's the starting point for us. So here, again, to reiterate, we are talking about Daivi Varnashram, which is keeping the Lord in the center. Therefore, the Lord says, by worship of the Lord, it's interesting. He's not referencing to Himself as me. He is referencing to Himself and the third person. Actually, there is one more we can read. Why? Why is the Lord not saying me here? So shall we read this and then we'll conclude the session. Krishna's intriguing third person references to Himself. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna sometimes refers to Himself in the third person. Why? To better understand, let's consider a specific example. In the 18th chapter, Krishna recommends working in a mood of worshipping that supreme person, from whom everything comes and by whom everything is pervaded, in the 46th Sloka. A few verses later, Krishna refers to Himself in the first person, in Shlokas 54 to 58, which is of course the Bhakti Yoga section. When using the third person reference, might Krishna be referring to someone other than Himself? No. The attributes of the third person divinity are said to be present in Krishna. Consider the attributes mentioned in 18.47. Krishna has earlier declared that everything comes from Him in one of the Chatushloka Gitas, and that everything is pervaded by Him in the 11th chapter. And that work is to be offered to him in the 3rd chapter and again in the 9th chapter. Why then might Krishna use the 3rd person reference? Possibly to indicate how divinity is conceived by the seekers described in those sections. In the sense, the person's mood of worship determines how they see the Lord. The section with the 3rd person reference is about Karma Yoga in this section, whereas the section with the 1st person reference is about Bhakti Yoga. So every time the Lord talks about Bhakti Yoga, he will refer to himself in the 1st person. If he talks about Karma Yoga or Jnana Yoga, he may talk about himself in the 3rd person. Karma yogis don't always have a clear conception of the divine. They are primarily concerned about staying detached and disentangled while working. Even if they start offering those fruits to the divine, that needn't immediately clarify their conception of the divine. While discussing such karma yogis, Krishna refers to himself in the 3rd person. Krishna then outlines how karma yogis evolve through Jnana Yoga, which was the current section that we are in, which is how karma yogis, if they add Jnana, they can come to that higher level of perfection. Then to Bhakti Yoga. So from Karma Yoga to Jnana Yoga, from Jnana Yoga to Bhakti Yoga. After sketching this multiple path progression toward liberation, Krishna delineates an alternative, Bhakti Yoga as a single pathway to liberation from wherever we are presently. Which means for those who are practicing Krishna consciousness, you don't have to go through that first to Karma Yoga, then graduate to Jnana Yoga, then graduate to Bhakti Yoga. So Bhakti Yoga is so unique that anybody can perform it. So that is the alternative that Krishna ultimately concludes with, that Bhakti Yoga as a single pathway to liberation from wherever we are presently. Bhakti yogis know whom their object of love is and why he is lovable. While discussing Bhakti yogis, Krishna refers to himself in the 1st person. Why? Because the bhaktas worship him as Bhagavan. Therefore, Krishna uses Ma or Mam in those sections to refer to himself, because the bhaktas are worshipping him directly. So because you're worshipping a personality, then obviously Krishna is going to refer to himself in the 1st person. Krishna's 3rd person and 1st person references to himself in particular sections could correlate with the conceptions of divinity of the seekers described in those sections, which means Krishna is calling out to himself personally when the devotees have a deep relationship with him. Right? Otherwise, Krishna knows that others may not know that he's the Supreme Lord, so he may refer to himself as in 3rd person. So here the Lord is saying, by worship of the Lord, who is the source of all beings and who is all pervading. So maybe these people have an understanding of Paramatma. A man can attain perfection through performing his work. So 2 things go hand in hand, worship and then doing your duties and responsibilities with devotion and with a sense of duty and with detachment. So duty, detachment, and devotion. That can lead you to the path of Bhakti Yoga.
If you like our videos, please subscribe to our channel and turn on the bell notification. If you'd like to join our classes every day, please check the details in the description section of this video. We look forward to serving you.